just days before everything changed forever, when the world still believed Ozzy Osbourne had more time, something happened that no one expected. In a quiet moment, away from cameras, reporters, and even close family, Ozzy asked to speak with Tony Iommi alone. This wasn't just an ordinary chat between two old bandmates. It felt different. There was a strange weight in the air, like Ozzy had been holding something deep inside for far too long. Tony could feel it too, though he didn't know what was coming. Ozzy wasn't the same wild rock star everyone remembered. He looked tired, softer, like someone who had finally made peace with the noise of the world. But there was still something left in his heart that he needed to get out. As Tony sat beside him, Ozzy didn't start with jokes or stories. He looked straight at him, eyes full of something Tony hadn't seen in years: fear. It wasn't fear of death, but fear of leaving something unsaid. Their friendship had lasted more than half a century. They had seen fame, failure, addiction, fights, forgiveness, and everything in between. Yet, in this moment, it wasn't about music or memories. It was about something much more human. Ozzy took a breath, as if trying to stop time, and then slowly began to speak. Tony felt chills run through him because he knew, without Ozzy saying it, that this was going to be the last deep conversation they would ever share. And when Ozzy finally said what he had been holding on to, it was not just heartbreaking. It was something that would live with Tony forever. No one else was meant to hear it. It was a private truth, one that came from years of pain, love, regret, and reflection. Whatever it was, it left Tony stunned and silent. Even now, he hasn't shared the full detail with the world, but the way he talks about that moment shows that it changed him. And the heartbreaking part is, Ozzy knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't want to die with a weight on his chest. He didn't want to take this truth to the grave. He wanted Tony to know, because deep down, that friendship mattered more than any spotlight. The man who had screamed on stages around the world, who had faced more chaos than most could imagine, ended his journey with a whisper. A quiet message meant only for someone who truly knew him. And now, as fans look back at Ozzy's life, many are left wondering what those final words were and why they still haunt Tony to this day. There are some things a person cannot carry alone, not even someone like Ozzy Osbourne, who had carried the weight of fame, mistakes, and battles for decades. As the end drew near, he felt something heavy in his heart, something that had been building for years but was never spoken out loud. He knew he couldn't leave this world with that silence still inside him, and he knew there was only one person who could understand the meaning behind it: Tony Iommi. They weren't just bandmates from Black Sabbath. They were brothers in spirit, connected by music, pain, and a lifetime of unforgettable moments. So when Ozzy asked to see Tony, it wasn't just for comfort or company. It was because he had something to say that he had never said before, not even to his family. It was a truth that had grown too loud to ignore. When Tony entered the room, he could feel that this wasn't just a goodbye. It was more like a final mission, a passing of something too personal for anyone else. Ozzy looked at him with eyes that were tired but honest. There was no mask, no show, only the man behind the legend. He told Tony there was something he had kept inside, something he wished he had said earlier, but never found the right time or courage. And now, with time running out, he had to get it out. Tony leaned in, listening closely, and what Ozzy said left him speechless. It wasn't about music, money, or mistakes. It was about something deep and personal, something tied to regret and love, something that revealed a side of Ozzy that the world rarely saw. This was not a performance. This was real, and it hurt. Tony could feel his chest tighten as Ozzy spoke, each word full of emotion and weight. He had seen Ozzy through highs and lows, through wild nights and quiet tears, but this moment was different. It felt sacred. And the heartbreaking part was that Ozzy had lived with this truth for so long, never knowing how to let it go. Now, with death so close, he finally found the strength to share it. And he chose Tony, not because he expected forgiveness or answers, but because he needed someone who could truly understand. Whatever Ozzy said that night changed the way Tony saw everything. It wasn't just a message. It was a piece of Ozzy's soul, offered in his final days, asking to be held by someone who wouldn't let it be forgotten. The world may never know exactly what he said, but those few words now live in the silence that follows his music, in the way Tony pauses when he speaks about him, and in the pain of a friendship that ended with a final, quiet confession, too heavy for the stage. There was a moment the cameras missed, a moment that never made it to the news, a moment that will never be fully understood by the public because it happened when no one was watching. It was a quiet room, no crowd, no flashing lights, just two men who had lived through everything together. Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi had stood on the biggest stages in the world, but this meeting was different. It wasn't about rehearsals, tours, or interviews. It was just them, face to face, with something hanging in the air that neither one could ignore. Ozzy had asked to see Tony, not because he needed anything, but because he had something to give, something that couldn't be written down or spoken in front of others. The world saw Ozzy as the wild rocker, the Prince of Darkness, the loud voice of heavy metal. But what Tony saw that day was a man who had taken off every layer of fame and was simply trying to find peace before he left. There was a long silence before Ozzy spoke, and in that silence was more emotion than words could ever explain. Tony felt it too. It wasn't like any conversation they'd ever had. There was a sadness in Ozzy's voice, but also a strange calm, as if he had made peace with everything except this one last thing he needed to say. He didn't cry, but his eyes looked as if they had already cried all the tears they could. What he shared wasn't a secret meant to shock the world. It was something deeper, something personal, something only someone like Tony could truly understand. It was about their journey, about the weight they both carried, about the moments they never talked about, because life moved too fast. Ozzy didn't need to be remembered for his albums or wild stories in that moment. He needed to be remembered by his friend, not as a rock star, but as a man who had been through pain, regret, love, and fear. Tony sat there, listening, knowing that whatever Ozzy was saying came from the deepest part of him. And when Ozzy finished, there was nothing left to say. Tony didn't respond with words. He just nodded, holding the silence with respect, knowing it was the only proper answer. That moment, unseen and unheard by the world, now lives quietly between them. Except Ozzy is gone, and Tony is the only one left to remember. And every time he speaks of Ozzy now, you can hear something extra in his voice. A pause, a crack, a hidden story that's too painful to fully share. Fans will always wonder what Ozzy said in that final private moment, but maybe it's better that way, because some truths are not for the world. They're meant to live quietly, in the heart of someone who was there, someone who truly knew the man behind the legend and carries the weight of his final words forever. There's a reason Ozzy Osbourne chose Tony Iommi in his final days, and it wasn't just because they shared a long history in music. It was something deeper, something only they truly understood, something built through decades of chaos, survival, forgiveness, and unbreakable loyalty. As Ozzy felt time slipping away, he could have spoken to anyone, family, other friends, even fans, but instead, he reached out to Tony. That choice says more than words ever could. It shows that no matter how far they had drifted over the years or how many problems they had faced, there was still a kind of trust between them that couldn't be shaken. Ozzy had been surrounded by people his whole life, yet he waited until the very end to share something important with just one person. Why Tony? Why then? That's the question everyone keeps asking, and the answer lies not just in their music, but in the quiet moments no one ever saw. Tony was there in the beginning, before the fame, before the madness, when they were just two young boys chasing sound and trying to survive. He knew the real Ozzy, not the one painted by headlines or shaped by another stage. That's why Ozzy couldn't leave without speaking to him one last time. He didn't want to carry this truth into the next life, but he also didn't want just anyone to hold it. He needed someone who would protect it, someone who would understand the weight of it, and someone who wouldn't turn it into a story for attention. When they sat together that final time, Ozzy's voice wasn't strong, but his words were. He looked at Tony not with fear, but with a kind of quiet pain, the pain of holding something in for too long. And Tony, sitting across from him, didn't ask questions or interrupt. He listened, really listened, because he could tell that this was one of the most important things Ozzy had ever said. It was a confession, but not one filled with guilt. It was more like a final piece of the puzzle, something that had to be handed over before it was lost forever. Tony never told the world what it was, and maybe he never will. But what's clear is that whatever Ozzy shared, it was something he couldn't leave unsaid. And the fact that he trusted Tony with it proves how deep their bond truly was. In that quiet room, far from the noise of the world, a dying man looked at his old friend and gave him something precious. Not a song, not a memory, but a truth that mattered more than either of them ever showed on stage. Now Ozzy is gone, and Tony walks with that moment in his heart, knowing that in the end, out of everyone in the world, he was the one Ozzy trusted most, and that truth is as beautiful as it is heartbreaking. Tony Iommi had heard Ozzy Osbourne say a lot of things over the years, some funny, some wild, and some unforgettable, but nothing could have prepared him for what Ozzy told him just days before his death. It wasn't something loud or dramatic. In fact, it was quiet, almost whispered, like it was too heavy to say out loud. The moment Ozzy began speaking, Tony felt the air shift. He had seen Ozzy in his highest moments on stage and in his darkest struggles off it, but this was something else. There was no performance here, no spotlight, just two old friends sitting in silence before one of them would be gone forever. Ozzy didn't build up to what he had to say. He just looked at Tony with tired eyes and said the words like they'd been sitting on his chest for years. And when he said them, Tony didn't know what to do. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there, frozen, because even he, after everything they had been through, never expected this from Ozzy. It wasn't a secret about fame or a final message to the fans. It was something personal, something deep, something that came from a place of pain and love and years of silence. And what made it even harder was the way Ozzy said it. With honesty, without fear, but with the kind of sadness that only comes when you know your time is almost over. Tony felt like he was holding something sacred in that moment, something no one else would ever hear, and that truth hit him harder than anything else. This wasn't just Ozzy clearing his heart. It was Ozzy showing that under the tattoos, the music, and the madness, there was still a man who felt things deeply, who carried regrets, and who didn't want to leave without finally being understood. Tony never expected those words. He never thought Ozzy would choose him for something so personal. But he did, and now that moment lives only in Tony's memory. He has never shared what was said, not because he's trying to hide it, but because he knows that moment was never meant for anyone else. It was a private goodbye, a quiet truth between two people who had seen it all. And now, when Tony talks about Ozzy, there's a pause in his voice, a small silence that says more than any words ever could. Fans may never know what Ozzy said that day, but they can feel the weight of it in Tony's eyes, in the way he remembers him, in the way he carries that final moment like a gift and a burden. It changed him. It hurt him. And it reminded him that even legends like Ozzy Osbourne have things they wish they'd said sooner, and when they finally do, it can break the heart of the one they trust most.